All right, it's African American History Month.
Yeah.
So this is about 5 years ago. We were deep into a lot of different things with Jeffrey and some PBS documentaries on people of great figures in American faith history of the 20th century. One, Howard Thurman. It's been long enough, we thought, that this is somebody that a lot of people still don't know too much about in the post-George Floyd America, maybe worth taking another look and reviewing the life of a man from the first half of the 20th century, theologian, pastor, mystic is what he's been called, who, well, I don't want to tell the story. Let's listen to this. It's a 60-minute documentary, so I thought 30 minutes today, and then let's talk, and then we'll do the same thing next week when we finish it up, and just leave it open after this first 30 minutes. If you've heard about him or not, what is he saying to us today and to you today? Okay? Initial thoughts. I don't know where to begin, but please help me. Yes?
Well, before I came here, I remember that we had a film on Howard Thurman about 5 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago. I thought, oh, are we doing this again?
It's a rerun.
Oh, not really.
Okay.
Because this is a different, very different film.
Okay.
And color. The other one was black and white, and it was made a very long time ago. I don't know, it seemed like the 50s and 60s.
Thank you.
And this one is more closely akin to the one we had until de Chardin. The way it's really focusing on his ideas. It's a brilliant film, and I'm glad I'm here to see it. I guess because my husband's from Mississippi, and I remember my first trip down there when we went to meet his parents again after our wedding. They had come up for our wedding, and we stopped in Kentucky, and there were the black and white bathrooms and drinking fountains.
What year was this?
1962.
Black and white bathrooms.
Yes. And his family, he lived in New Albany, Mississippi, which is a northern town, very far, quite far north. And they desegregated the schools very easily because there were people in the town. There were some very large landowners around there. There was a Mr. Rainey, who I know had a vast amount of land, and I know he went to India Africa to hunt wild animals and stuff. So he was a major influence, and there are some major influences in the people there that owned a lot of property in the town. So the schools were very quickly integrated down there, and they were already integrated, I think, when I first came down there, or shortly afterwards. And then my husband's, was a sheriff of Oxford County, where they integrated the University of Mississippi. And I think there were some people there were black people in the, I'm not sure exactly how the whole story is, but I remember being in, they had town squares there, and that's where the town's government would be, and there was the courthouse was always in the center of these squares down in Mississippi. And I remember there was a place where they were in Oxford because he was part of the troops holding off the people who were against integration. And I remember that there were bayonet marks in the county courthouse door, and they're still there today, I think.
What? A bayonet?
Bayonets. Well, they had the National Guard was protecting black people, and also
Forcing desegregation.
even the police force that was for integration, the National Guard had to protect them against the people that were anti-integration.
Nice reminder. That's a good anecdote about how closely we're all related in this country in the last century. I haven't heard that in a while, where, the National Guard was called out to bring these kids into school in the morning, because otherwise they wouldn't be allowed in.
Well, was living in Chicago at the time, and I remember, Martin Luther King marching through the neighborhoods and the tremendous animosity of the people on the south of the southwest side of
the
Chicago.
west side.
Tremendous animosity, and they were showing things at the marchers.
Didn't he also
And you know
march
what
through
also started
Franklin
was that
area?
at that time, the black people who are trying to integrate society, they're so well dressed. People were well dressed and when you came to church, you never came in slacks. Women were still wearing skirts because I went to the University of Illinois in Champaign-Urbana from about 1958 to 1962, and you were not allowed to wear. You could not wear slacks to class, only at final exams. And of course, there were hours women had to be in dormitories by 10:30 on weekdays, and I had to 11, 12 o'clock on Saturday. But it was just a completely different, the whole side of the United States was completely different. But then again, you didn't have presidents either that could do what Trump was doing today. It would probably not have elected something like Trump. I know they would.
Honor meant something.
Because I do remember, I had some relatives that were very wealthy in Cleveland. And when Trump was running the first time in 2015, was that? They were saying, well, he might be okay if he has the proper advisors around him, we'll vote for him.
I think, thank you, Greg, for putting this on the calendar, because I know I've had this book on my shelf. I've heard of Howard Thurman for a long, long time. I love his Christmas. He has a Christmas prayer. Now it's time to do the work of Christmas, and that lives within me. And also that quote about the world needs people who come alive. So I'm so grateful to be learning more about him. And I didn't realize he was a mystic. I didn't know how closely he was tied to the civil rights movement, but I think this is probably the video we needed to feel right now to help remind us.
I was thinking as this started that the conflict that was going on about the powerful against the oppressed people, it's not much different today. We have a group of very, very wealthy people trying to control everybody else. And how do we go about dealing with that? It's a challenge.
This stuff.
I think this probably has some relevance to us, particularly today. But I also wanted to share that I read this morning. It was a quote about Christianity is doomed unless we become mystics, unless we employ what he's talking about within our personal experience. Having a feeling of a real personal connection with God that moves you. It's interesting. What do you think?
Amen.
Me?
No, I'm just wondering.
I feel like,
That's pretty much what he was saying too. He was
except that he put his Christianity into work out in the world as well.
Right.
Like, I don't think it can be either or. If you abandon Christianity completely, if you abandon what's around you and only have a faith that is between you and God. When you say right after Jesus, in the few decades, centuries after Jesus, there arose there are plenty of people in the world who thought mysticism, there's something called the Gnostic people.
Mhm.
They were all mystics, and they communed with God, and they felt like they could commune with God, like Jesus did, and they would put out, they might do some teaching. And the story of the early church, I never understood the Apostles' Creed. How many of you grew up saying the Apostles' Creed?
Mhm.
We didn't grow up saying it, and I was like, what is this all about? And Christian history in seminary was so amazing for me because it laid out line by line, that creed came together over centuries.
Mhm.
And it was, every time the church realized, this is a problem, we want to reject this teaching, and then they'd add another line to the, and they'd have to agree to it, and it's about men coming together and having consensus, and I don't always believe that's necessary in terms of God, like how much do we have to recite what men have decided, or, and I say men because at that time it was all men, right? But there was this, I think it was called, they were the Marcians, following a certain teacher who was Gnostic, and they had to reject him because when you have mystics communing with God, then they could get any kind of message suddenly and then tell people. And so the church at large had to say, no. These are the teachings. This is what we're going with. This is the canon. And that Gnosticism, that's not the way. And I'm not trying to say in response to mystic. I think that, it's wonderful for people to have a relationship with God, but I worry when you said that, my response is like, but what about this? In seminary, we have this, the cross is vertical and horizontal, right?
I think the quote was really saying that we can't rely, just like he said, we can't rely just on the teachings, on this intellectual aspect of it, but we have to incorporate both aspects of it. If Christianity is really going to survive. But I think that that's what he's saying. And I think it's interesting because he didn't think about himself as a theologian, even though he was. He sort of rejected that. He took it in sort of, I think in his mind, in a different direction.
What I
And
love
actions
that.
and so on.
I love that he went and studied under the Quakers because I have a friend who's Quaker from seminary, and I asked him how do we share Quaker to this group, the spiritual enrichment group, and he kind of said, we should go to a meeting. And I said, why? This is a 8:45 to 9:45 time slot. I'm not sure I can get everybody to go to a meeting and come back to church. So he sent me some videos, but I have been in the presence of Quakers who've been praying for me during a meeting before, and there is some very interesting, somewhat mystical stuff happening in that moment. Very special.
Because that's, in the American, 18th, 17th, 18th century traditions of a spirituality coming from nature and inner peace.
Okay.
And is that what Quakerism is?
I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know about it, but
I don't remember either. Nancy, were you gonna?
No, I wanted just to hitch on that whole thing. Thurman said, what do you do when your back is against the wall? And,
anybody feel that right now?
And I think that's a lot of what we're experiencing right now.
JS is nodding her head. When you said that, what do you?
Yeah.
What do you do? How do you-
yes,
When you're back, and now she's smiling, because she understood, yes, thank you, JS, yes, I understand that.
and what do you do? And that is where your faith comes in. But it doesn't come in at the moment. You're busy. You're very busy. But when you think about it, or at least when I thought about it, as soon as he said that, I thought of when my back was against the wall. And I was amazed at what I did. But now that I think about it, at the age of 85, I know that it has to do with the Quakers. It has to do with our ideas and our spirit. And I know that applies to everything. It doesn't have to have a theology. Well, you know what I mean? It doesn't have to have a text.
That's
Sure.
very
I
good.
think that's what you're talking about. I think you're talking about you have mystical experience.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, you can you make it that when you understand.
You understand it.
Yes, I do.
Experience it.
But you're at the time in your life, you're too busy.
I think in hindsight, it becomes clear in
Hindsight is it, yes.
I always have that in hindsight too.
That makes sense, and also what he was just quoted as saying, maybe when things seem like there's nowhere to go, back against the wall, I'm just bounded by what society, I guess, is allowing me to do in this
That's it.
vocabulary. Go talk to a tree, and you'll find what's really in you, and maybe some new ideas and new ways of communicating with the world, once you can just maybe forget about the strictures that have been placed on you. Just go talk to a tree, sit on the beach for a while, and then come back.
Yeah, but didn't he also say something about you are worth it? The society does not determine who you are to
Right.
be who you are, and they may break your bones, but they can't break your spirit because you know who you are.
But you have to have that deep understanding. You have to have that open mind. Don't you? I
Of
mean,
course.
you marvel at what you came up with. And then you realize you wouldn't have had you not had an open mind. I know that now.
Yes. And
Actually, I will say that I have a relationship with a tree in Michigan. And that tree has helped me so much through the travails I've had, particularly this last summer. And I visit that tree every single day, and I did have a mystical experience. I put my, for some reason, I don't know why I did, I just put my hands around that tree and I put my head to the tree. I was standing there. And that tree, I could hear speaking. I mean, not in words, but I heard a sound, a movement of the tree itself, the life of the tree.
I think, yes.
And that was mystical.
That is, next time someone accuses
Yeah.
a tree hugger. It's a-
Yeah,
Trying to say something.
JS, please.
I have a tree that I'm looking at outside my window, and I have drawn that tree 4 times, and the 4 pictures are up in my dining room, and representing what the tree looks like during the fall 4 seasons. So that's what I've done with my tree. I brought it inside and put it in a prominent place in my home.
I love it.
Thank you, JS.
Great.
Thank you. You're very much with us today. Well, it's lovely having you with us. Thank you.
Oh, yes.
I was just thinking that as they were talking about a mystic, that JS is a little bit of a mystic.
I'm very much of a mystic, and I believe that each of us having conversations like this, each of us, the label mystic sort of makes it sound like we're woo-woo.
right.
But instead, when we talk about this and how natural it is, yes, there is probably a mystic of sorts in all of us, but we don't think of it as woo-woo at all. We think of it as being very important to how we view ourselves and present ourselves to the world.
That's right. Thanks for reminding me, JS. You know, a lot of you probably remember this, but a good 4 or 5 years ago, another great documentary. It was just about mysticism. I think called "With One Voice." Does that sound familiar? Yeah, and I remember first of all the voice of Peter Coyote, the actor that Ken Burns uses for a lot of his documentaries. But I want to maybe find that and maybe ask everybody to revisit that one if you haven't seen it in a while, because it was mystics from all faith traditions and even agnostics.
There was a phrase that I embodied and actually drew a document that looks like this. It has to do with if you were to bring 10 lamps from all over the world and brought them into one place, the 10 lamps would differ in form and shape. But if you look at the flame, there's no difference between any of them.
That's
And
One of the greatest metaphors.
I drew 10 lamps, each of which has exactly the same flame.
A lot of ways to produce the same light.
Thank you.
Love it.
JS. You know, in the Unitarian Church of Evanston, which I go back to because I was there when I was 4 years old, but the contemporary one, because everything in that church keeps changing with society. And there is a very large flame in the center. So that was, that made me think of that. But because it's that flame of hope and desire, that is a flame of our being too, that it's a flame of life of our moving forward. But I don't know if I can say one thing about what you were talking about Christianity. I'm very much of a pragmatist, and I very much, I'm in the world today and what's happening. I want to know, and I'm hoping that things work out for the better for all people rather than just a few. Because there was in the Wall Street Journal, right after the inauguration, for the first time ever, I saw, and this was in their right-hand column, when they were talking about what was occurring at the inauguration. They said there were 6 oligarchs standing behind him. And that was the first time I'd say I ever seen the word oligarchs applied to anybody in the United States. And, there's, within that paper, within the Wall Street Journal, because it's owned by Rupert Murdoch, and he supports the Jewish point of view very, very strongly, and Netanyahu. And yet there's other things that are going on too, so there's sort of a yin and yang going on within the paper. But I am very, I feel that people, as we know, the churches, Christian churches are declining at the rate of 3% a year, which is, that's 30% every 10 years. And numerically, all religious institutions. But I feel there's a natural goodness within people, a fairness. And this is what we have to nurture.
There is, but somehow we got this set of Christian churches and this set of Christian churches, and they're not
Talking to each other at all,
talking
or
to each
even
other
pulling
at
from
all.
the same
It's
scripture.
very similar to what he was talking about earlier.
I'll have some.
It seems to me that there's very much similarity between the time he was living and the time we're living. With these splits in the whole society. It's not partially racial, but other kinds of.
You're thinking
issues
within the religious groups that are still, you're thinking that within the religious groups that are still in existence, that we need to move together, that we need to act together.
I don't think it's possible.
I don't think it's.
We're on completely different spectrums. I went into seminary wanting to be, I was an organizer on the left, right? And I was like, I'll be able to speak to people better once I understand the scriptures better and I can find this common ground. And then I went to Hastings, Nebraska, and then I learned from engaging with them and also from some friends who grew up evangelical that there wasn't as much common ground as I thought there was. Because whereas in the mainline Protestant church, we preach mostly from the New Testament, from Jesus's teachings. And one of my friends told me, that's used in Sunday school with children, but in Sunday service, they preach adults, Paul. They preach the Pauline letters. They preach what not to do. And Paul is a very different tone. If you are familiar at all with, some of the ways that Paul teaches, Paul is a very different tone than Jesus. And we're pulling from different parts of our same sacred book. And yes, there should be something that unites us.
And different interpretations.
You mean the Pauline evangelism, where, Jesus was speaking like, I'm not here to take over. I don't know what's gonna come of it. Am I starting a new church? I don't know.
Well, Jesus's, ministry boils down to love God, love yourself, love your neighbor.
Right.
Love, do unto others as they would do unto you. And we have all these scriptures that back up that. And I noticed when I was evangelical, in my experience with evangelical people, like I went to college and I had a Bible study with some people who said, this is the way to believe. And they were evangelical. And I was like, well, that's not what I learned in church. And they're like, well, your church just is not good enough. You need to be, this is the right way to be Christian. So that's kind of where my ire comes from, because I've wandered away from religion for a good 10 years because of these people who told me I didn't believe right, until I was an organizer and some people started saying, there's a lot of different ways to believe. And that kind of pulled me back in. But, so there is a focus from those people from college on all about the death of Christ, bringing us to reconcile with God. And we need to be white, we need to be washed clean of our sin so that we can be clean and be with God. And the only way to do that, Jesus took on, it's very atonement theory. It's very sacrificial. It's very much about Jesus was the sacrifice so that we could be as flawed as we are and still be forgiven by God. And I think that's not opposite of my belief, but that's not central to my beliefs. My beliefs are, we all have God within, a little bit more like Quaker, and we all have the capacity to do good and evil, and God is there with us at all times, but God does not arrange things for us. In my estimation, we have free will, and God is there with us to maybe whisper and say, choose this way, but we don't always do that. We do our thing, and the world works out the way it works out. I am on a tangent right now. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to go this far, but I feel like, the people on the opposite, we're gonna start talking about this in March. In the messenger, I don't know if you saw, I wanted to talk about Christian nationalism,
Yeah.
which is part of what we're seeing. So we're gonna listen to, Tracy Blackman talk a little bit about it. She's a high official in the United Church of Christ, but she served as our executive minister of justice and witness. But also just about what is this difference and how do we bridge? I mean, maybe it's a way that we kind of try to look. There are ways to bridge, but people have to be willing. And I just want you to know that we're reading very different insights into what scripture tells us.
Oh, yes.
And
So there have been people who've been using the message of Christ to do nothing but divide
Right.
society. We can learn from the past. Maybe things are a little bit different now. Civil rights have made some progress. And things are a lot different now because back then, it was, everyone was supposed to be a Christian. Now a lot of Americans don't follow any religions. So what kind of control of the whole national debate do we have? We'll see.
When you talk about the civil rights things being different, I don't believe it is.
Okay.
I think it was more overt and we saw it, and now it's covert. It's still there, it's just,
Moving in the wrong direction.
yeah, we just can't see it, and so we're not as aware of. And we think we take that on as it's better. It's not better,
We can see that,
yeah,
but a lot of people, I guess,
Anybody of color now, we
yeah.
get rid of anybody from a different country, we get rid of anybody of a different, in terms of their idea of sexuality is dismissed, it has to be only this very rigid, white, male, Christian to be acceptable.
We're just not using fire hoses.
That's kind of the new way.
Yeah.
Nancy and Florian, we haven't heard from you very much. Go ahead.
I'm thinking of this, big mural I stuck in my trunk because my son didn't want it. It was a mural of space and all the planets. And it was the Hubble, we've had 7 or 8 Hubbles.
Yeah.
And it was all their trips, whipping around all the planet. And all of this to me is if you want unity in the world, just look at that.
Mhm.
And so, and where all our minds can look at that. But what you get out of that is this amazing epiphany, I think. And I thought, if every church in the world had this mural, the Hubble mural, they might calm down a little.
Thank you. Just take a look at all of our differences, these
Yeah, yeah.
stupid things we're fighting at.
And all
Look
the
at this
things you
map.
think you
That
know,
one little dot, that's
Yeah.
all of us.
Yeah.
We're all in this together.
we're in this together. So when,
Yes, and
We should be in this together.
because we're
Well,
working as a church.
We have no choice.
oh, sorry, go ahead.
We're
I
almost
was just thinking that my faith is really very, I guess, childish, very, very simple. And when these evangelical Christians that, to me, they need to call themselves something else, because you can't be a Christian if you don't believe in Christ. And if you push the New Testament away, where there's all the, the woman at the well and all these parables and stories about Christ doing what the people would never do, the Good Samaritan, helping people who aren't like you,
Touching the lepers.
forgiving this, doing the, if you're gonna do, then I don't know what I would call them, but I guess the Old Testament is more rules, okay, but Christ didn't necessarily say these are wrong. It upsets me that they think that, theirs is the only way, because that wasn't what, to me, the Bible says.
They don't want to talk about forgiveness. They don't want to treat the stranger as themselves. Wow.
And so
Well,
why?
Tim had an interesting observation. He said, answered this, he said, well, ask them, are they
Right,
mega Christians or are they Jesus Christians?
Zodi said MAGA.
Are they what Christian?
Mega
Mega.
Christians
Oh,
or
mega,
Jesus
right.
Christians?
Because before the election in Iowa, Judy Woodruff went out to talk to this woman who was a facilitator group of all kinds of topics. And this was, of course, for the election. And these 10 people, different ages, men and women, all were Republicans and all were professed to be Christians. And one of the questions the facilitator said was, our president, Joe Biden, is a very devout Catholic. He goes to church every Sunday. You can tell by his conversation, whatever, that he's a man of the faith. Do you think he's a Christian? And every one of the 10 said no.
It's tragic.
No. Okay.
Yeah, some people are organized around hate and fear.
Yeah.
So there is a time right now, but how do we bring this conversation into WCC and mull around in what it is that we stand for and what we do? And maybe that at the end of the next.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe, let's,
Christian nationalism.
why don't we do that?
Yeah.
Let's, after we watch the second half of this next week, let's
Yeah.
cut straight to the chase.
Yeah,